Airline staff mock black woman. Then she pulls out her USS Senator ID. They say that real power doesn't always wear a sign around its neck, and that sometimes underestimating the quiet figure in the corner can be your biggest mistake. That's exactly what happened on an ordinary day at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, where an unsuspecting black woman strolled into the terminal, minding her own business. Little did the airline staff know, behind her polite smiles and low-key demeanor lay a U.S. Senator's credentials, one that could send shockwaves through their entire operation. Mocked and dismissed for her appearance, she kept her calm until the insults piled up. Then her bold move changed everything. Senator Althea Johnson stood at the entrance to Chicago O'Hare's bustling Terminal 3, pulling a modest carry-on behind her. She wore a practical yet elegant grey pantsuit, with a simple black purse slung across her shoulder. Her hair was styled in close cropped curls, and her only jewelry was a subtle gold necklace. She enjoyed traveling light, no entourage, no flashy displays. It reminded her of her humble upbringing in Detroit, where her parents had taught her the power of hard work and quiet resilience. Althea was in her second term as a U.S. Senator from Michigan. Despite her national recognition, she often found that people didn't immediately place her face, especially when she was off television and without the typical trappings of high office. She preferred it that way. It allowed her to gauge everyday experiences firsthand and connect with constituents on a personal level. Today she was flying to Washington, D.C. for urgent committee hearings on economic reforms. The morning had been hectic. She'd wrapped up a local town hall event, fielded half a dozen calls from colleagues, and now had just enough time to catch her early afternoon flight. As she navigated the throngs of travelers, she didn't expect any special treatment, only standard courtesy. Still, she noticed subtle glances from passers-by. Some recognized her but weren't entirely sure. Others just thought she looked vaguely familiar. Reaching the American Airlines check-in kiosk, Althea punched in her reservation code, verifying seat details. A text from her chief of staff, Vanessa, popped up, reminding her to be ready for back-to-back meetings upon arrival. Althea sighed wearily. The demands of her position were unrelenting, but she relished the opportunity to make a meaningful difference. She had no idea her day would soon unravel in ways she never imagined. Her focus was on the typical frustrations of modern air travel lines, security checks, and potential delays. Little did she know that a group of airline staff, ignorant of her identity, would treat her with open disrespect. And she certainly couldn't predict how badly it would escalate once snide remarks and laughter replaced basic courtesy. Yet Althea had faced storms before. She carried in her heart a quiet resolve and something else that would shock them all, the ID card signifying her status as a United States Senator. Their jeers were about to ricochet with karmic force. After checking in, Senator Johnson proceeded to the baggage drop area. Even though she was traveling light, she had a small piece of luggage that she preferred to check so she could move freely through the airport. She approached the American Airlines baggage counter, where a pair of uniformed employees, one named Jacob, the other Shannon, looked bored, huddled together behind the desk. Both appeared to be in their mid-20s, wearing standard-issue airline uniforms, complete with name tags. Althea offered a polite smile as she handed them her reservation details. "Good afternoon," she said warmly, trying to set a positive tone. Jacob barely glanced at her. Instead, he flicked his eyes toward the screen and spoke in a flat monotone. "ID, please," he said, with neither greeting nor eye contact. Althea retrieved her driver's license from her purse and handed it over. She didn't particularly mind a no-frills exchange, but something in their body language was off. Shannon, who was supposed to help, seemed too engrossed in checking her phone under the counter, stifling a laugh at something on the screen. Jacob typed a few details, then paused, frowning at the computer. Looks like you booked a first-class ticket?" "That's correct," Althea replied. She'd paid for first class herself. She needed the quiet space to review documents for the committee hearing, and she travelled frequently enough to justify the expense. Jacob snorted softly, exchanging a glance with Shannon. Something akin to amusement flickered across his face. Shannon looked up, giggled, and returned to her phone, making no effort to hide the smirk tugging at her lips. Althea's brow furrowed slightly, but she remained composed. She had faced worse disrespect in the political arena, from adversaries who underestimated her. But this was unexpected coming from airline staff. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" she asked calmly. "No, no problem," Jacob murmured, but his tone hinted otherwise. He printed out the baggage tag and handed it over abruptly. "Take your bag to the oversized drop area over there." He pointed vaguely, making it clear he had no intention of assisting further. Shannon's stifled laughter floated in the background. Althea felt a twinge of anger. Still, she swallowed it, took her luggage, and walked away. She reminded herself that courtesy was a two-way street, but some people simply refused to meet you halfway. For now, she let it slide. Yet a small voice inside her whispered that this might only be the beginning of a much larger affront. Not long after, Althea wheeled her carry-on toward the TSA security lines. She left her checked bag at the designated drop-off, carefully making sure the tag was correct. As she navigated the ropes leading to the X-ray scanners, she noticed a commotion a few lanes over a passenger arguing with TSA officers. She felt a familiar twinge of sympathy. Traveling could be stressful, and misunderstandings happened all the time. Thankfully, the pre-check line was shorter. She had pre-check as part of her frequent travel for official duties, though she rarely flashed her senator credentials unless absolutely necessary. At times, she sensed that the principle of equal treatment was best upheld by going through the standard procedures besides. She preferred to observe daily life without always announcing her status. As Althea placed her laptop and shoes in separate bins, she heard faint snickers from somewhere behind her. She turned slightly to see Shannon and Jacob stepping up to the TSA line, apparently off duty now, chatting with each other while they eyed Althea. It struck her as odd. Why would airline employees be going through security as if they were passengers? Then she recalled that sometimes staff flew as non-revenue passengers to reposition or take advantage of flight benefits. She overheard whispered comments. "Shannon, first class." "Sure. Did you see her old carry-on? Like it's from a thrift store." "Jacob, the nerve of some people. Bet she's scammed some upgrade or something." Shannon tittered, right? "She definitely doesn't look like she belongs up there with the business crowd." Their eyes flicked toward Althea, who pretended she couldn't hear. Her chest tightened. The open mockery stung, particularly because they'd formed such a quick assumption about her. She forced herself to remain calm. Senators were used to tough words, but this felt more personal, more pointed at her race and appearance. Althea took a deep breath, telling herself that not everyone at American Airlines was like these two. Over the years, she had encountered many helpful airline employees, but these two were crossing a line. She tried to focus on her official obligations waiting in D.C., reminding herself of the seriousness of her role. She would not allow two employees' pettiness to ruin her day, yet a flicker of anger persisted. If their behavior worsened, she might have to step in and remind them politely but firmly of the respect every passenger deserved. For now, she moved on, collecting her belongings from the scanner, bracing for what might await her at the gate. Once Althea cleared security, she looked at her boarding pass, Gate C12 for American Airlines Flight 1081. She had some time before boarding, so she decided to grab a coffee from a nearby cafe. The airport was a beehive of bustling travelers, some heading to family vacations, others to business meetings, each with their own stories. Althea often found airport environments fascinating, a crossroads of countless lives, each moment brimming with possibilities. She took a seat in the cafe's small seating area, sipping her latte and leafing through notes for the upcoming committee hearing. She planned to argue for stronger economic support for small businesses in low-income neighborhoods. It was a cause close to her heart, after all. She had grown up watching her parents struggle to keep their modest auto repair shop afloat during Detroit's economic downturn. Midway through her notes, a voice startled her. "Excuse me, ma'am, can I ask you something?" Althea looked up to find a uniformed American Airlines staff member, this one with a name tag that read Carol. She had a warm smile. "Certainly," Althea replied, standing to address her. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for any inconvenience you may have experienced earlier," Carol said, lowering her voice. "I'm not fully sure what happened, but I noticed Jacob and Shannon giggling and making comments at the check-in counter. It didn't look right." Althea felt a mix of gratitude and surprise. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I did sense some unprofessional behavior. I was hoping it was just me being overly sensitive." Carol shook her head. "No, it wasn't just you. They've had complaints before. I don't have direct authority over them, but I couldn't help noticing. I wanted to let you know that if you need any assistance, I'm stationed near Gate Ken. You can come find me." Touched by Carol's concern, Althea smiled warmly. "That's very kind of you. I'm all right for now, but if anything else happens, I'll be sure to seek you out." With a sympathetic nod, Carol left. Althea sank back into her seat, feeling a wave of relief that not everyone at the airline condoned such behavior. Perhaps she would never need Carol's assistance. Yet Carol's subtle warning served as a reminder. Something about Shannon and Jacob's attitude might escalate if not checked. Althea wanted to believe the best in people, but she also knew how prejudice, whether subconscious or overt, could fester quickly. She returned to her notes, but the calm she had felt before was tinged with a hint of unease about what lay ahead. Arriving at Gate 12, Althea found the waiting area crowded. The overhead screens displayed flights to various destinations, but hers, flight 1081 to Washington National Airport, was set to board in 30 minutes. She spotted a seat near the window and settled down, continuing to review her talking points for the committee hearing. Across the aisle, a young mother struggled to calm her restless toddler, while two businessmen in suits were engrossed in a lively debate about market trends. Althea took in the scene with a small smile, remembering that behind every travel schedule lay unique stories and challenges. She was used to observing people, her political instincts always tuned in to the human side of policy work. Then, like a bad omen, Shannon and Jacob appeared at the gate podium, apparently assigned to assist with the boarding process. Althea's stomach tightened. They stood there, scanning the crowd with bored expressions. Jacob was tapping on the computer, Shannon whispering in his ear, occasionally bursting into a quiet laugh. Althea caught a flash of condescension on their faces as they looked around the crowd. Sure enough, it didn't take long for them to notice her. Jacob elbowed Shannon, nodding in Althea's direction. Shannon rolled her eyes, then turned back to the computer with a smirk. Althea pretended to be absorbed in her notes, but her pulse quickened. She reminded herself to stay focused and calm. One part of her wanted to approach them and demand respect, but she decided not to escalate things yet. Minutes later, an announcement crackled over the gate loudspeaker. "Attention, passengers on American Airlines Flight 1081 to Washington National. We will begin pre-boarding shortly for passengers with disabilities, families with young children, and active military." Jacob's voice was monotone, but Shannon smirked as she looked in Althea's direction. Althea remained seated, waiting for first-class boarding to be called. She was no stranger to the standard procedure, yet a feeling of apprehension fluttered in her chest. She suspected they might try something. Suddenly, a tap on her shoulder. Althea turned to see a passenger pointing to the seat next to her, which she had used to set down her briefcase. "May I sit here?" the passenger asked politely. "Of course," Althea replied, moving her briefcase to her lap. She placed her phone, wallet, and boarding pass inside, mentally preparing for potential chaos. The clock was ticking toward boarding. If Shannon and Jacob intended to cause trouble, she would soon find out she was next to board among the first-class group. Little did they know the real shock was yet to come. Althea arrived at Gate 12 to discover it abuzz with the usual pre-boarding bustle. Families corralling young children, business travelers typing furiously on laptops, and tired-looking tourists leaning against rolling suitcases. The overhead screens announced a slight delay, but a staff member soon corrected it. In her experience, such minor shifts were common enough not to warrant concern. She scanned the gate area for a place to sit. Most of the available seats were taken, so she opted to stand near a large window, quietly reviewing the documents she needed for her upcoming Senate committee session. Yet no matter how hard she tried to focus on legislative bullet points, her attention kept drifting to the two American Airlines employees stationed at the gate podium, Shannon and Jacob, the same pair who had treated her so coldly at check-in. A coil of apprehension tightened in her stomach. From her vantage point, she could see Shannon and Jacob behaving in a manner she would politely label unprofessional. Shannon scrolled through her phone while occasionally rolling her eyes at the line forming in front of the podium. Jacob half-heartedly fielded questions from passengers, never once looking up with a welcoming smile. Whenever the two paused to speak to each other, they exchanged private smirks or hushed laughs, shooting quick glances around them. Twice, Althea noticed them casting sidelong looks in her direction. Trying to maintain her composure, she reminded herself that she'd long ago learned the art of endurance in uncomfortable public situations. In the Senate, she faced combative colleagues and high-stakes debates daily, yet this scenario felt personal. She had simply arrived, dressed in her usual understated but professional attire, only to be labeled a target by strangers who knew nothing about her except their own misguided assumptions. An announcement soon crackled over the loudspeaker. Passengers requiring extra time or with small children may now board. Mothers, fathers, and toddlers congregated around the jet bridge. Althea exhaled slowly, knowing first-class boarding was next. This was the moment she dreaded, having to face Shannon and Jacob again. Sure enough, after the families were through, Jacob cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone with a perfunctory tone. "We will now begin boarding for our first-class passengers and executive platinum members on American Airlines Flight 1081 to Washington National." Shannon stood beside him, posture rigid, scanning the waiting crowd as if challenging someone to dare step forward. Althea gathered her carry-on bag and took her place in the short first-class line. She was fourth in line, behind an older couple wearing matching beige windbreakers and a business traveler juggling two phones. It was a small queue, exactly what she expected for a midday flight. As they inched toward the gate podium, she could hear Shannon and Jacob's voices more distinctly. "Oh, look who's here," Shannon muttered under her breath as Althea drew near. Jacob gave a quiet snicker. The older couple in front of Althea glanced back curiously, clearly picking up on the tension. But they proceeded without incident. Shannon and Jacob scanned their boarding passes with no issue, nodded, and let them through. Then it was Althea's turn. Shannon took Althea's boarding pass and stared at the screen with exaggerated scrutiny, as if searching for a hidden flaw. Meanwhile, Jacob craned his neck to peek at Althea, an expression hovering between smugness and doubt. "Miss Johnson, is it?" Shannon asked, arching a brow. "That's correct," Althea said evenly, offering a brief nod. Her voice was calm but firm. "First-class seat, I see," Shannon continued, scanning the details. She let the words hang in the air, loaded with an unspoken question. Why would you, of all people, be in first class? Yes, Althea repeated, refusing to rise to the implied challenge. She had purchased this seat fair and square, just like any other passenger who wanted extra space to work. Jacob made a show of looking at the digital manifest on his own terminal. Huh, that's interesting, he said, tapping something on his screen. He then leaned over to Shannon and whispered loudly enough for Althea to catch. We should be careful about letting people slip into first class who might not actually belong. Althea's anger flared, but she kept her tone level. Is there a problem with my reservation? Shannon hesitated, as if momentarily at a loss for words. Then she plastered on a patronizing smile. No problem, Miss Johnson, she said, returning the scanned boarding pass. We just need to confirm that you purchased the seat rather than upgrading with miles you don't have or any other arrangement. A flicker of confusion swept through Althea. Excuse me, I use my frequent flyer account like everyone else to book. I also paid the difference for first class. It should be in your records. Shannon waved the boarding pass dismissively. I'm sure it's fine, she said, her tone dripping with insincerity. We see this sort of thing all the time, though you'd be surprised how many people try to sneak in an upgrade. Jacob offered a mocking grin. We've got to watch out for those free riders. He emphasized the words in a way that made Althea's skin crawl. Behind Althea, the businessman juggling two phones cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable with the conversation. But Shannon and Jacob barely spared him a glance, too fixated on undermining Althea. The older couple who had just boarded were now standing a few steps away, pretending not to eavesdrop, but clearly interested in what was happening. Sensing all eyes on her, Althea refused to give in to humiliation. Her father's lessons came flooding back. Hold your head high. Don't let them see you sweat. She straightened her shoulders. I assure you there's no free riding here. Shannon shrugged, handing the boarding pass back with a slow, almost theatrical motion. Then, by all means, enjoy your flight, she drawled, making it sound like anything but a well-wish. Althea suppressed a heated retort. Instead, she clutched her carry-on and stepped forward, deciding she would deal with their behavior more formally if it continued. She had endured smirks and prejudice before in her life, a lifetime's worth, in fact. But she also knew that once the flight was airborne, the crew on board would be her primary concern. If Shannon and Jacob intended to keep antagonizing her, they would find out soon enough that this particular passenger had both the backbone and the authority to push back. As she walked down the jet bridge, her stomach churned with frustration and a subtle undercurrent of dread. She reminded herself of the responsibilities waiting for her in Washington. She needed to keep her energy focused. But if they keep pushing, she thought, I won't hesitate to stand up for myself, no matter the consequences. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant named Tony greeted her warmly. She found solace in his courteous smile, a small indication that not everyone shared Shannon and Jacob's contempt. Yet as she settled into seat 2A and caught a glimpse of Shannon's mocking expression through the cabin door, she knew this ordeal was far from over. Althea stepped into the bright, spacious first-class cabin of the Boeing 737. The plush, oversized seats offered a modicum of comfort ideal for working through a flight. She settled into seat 2A and quickly stowed her belongings in the overhead bin. Her phone buzzed with messages from her staff, but she took a moment to compose herself. She could still feel the sting of Shannon's and Jacob's scornful words. As she buckled in, Tony approached, his demeanor kind. Good afternoon. May I offer you a drink before takeoff? We have water, juice, or champagne. Althea offered a polite smile, appreciative of his warmth. Just water for now, thank you. He nodded and returned moments later with a chilled bottle of water and a plastic cup. Althea thanked him quietly, inwardly grateful to have at least one flight attendant treating her with respect. Passengers continued filing into first class, stowing bags, settling down. She recognized a few from the Gateline business travelers, a couple traveling for leisure, the mother with the infant. Then, to her surprise, Shannon and Jacob entered the first-class cabin. It wasn't unusual for gate agents to board for last-minute tasks or to coordinate with crew, but they seemed determined as they made a beeline for Tony. Althea pretended to focus on her phone, but her peripheral vision kept track of them. She watched as Shannon whispered something to Tony, who frowned, his gaze sliding toward Althea. Jacob stood behind Shannon with crossed arms. Tony held up a hand as if to say, "Calm down," but Shannon kept talking, her tone growing more insistent. Finally, Tony nodded, seemingly to placate them, then approached Althea's seat. "Miss Johnson?" he asked softly, though the entire cabin could probably hear. She looked up, noticing the curious stares of other passengers. "Yes," Tony glanced back at Shannon and Jacob, then leaned closer. "They're concerned about your boarding pass. They claim, they want to verify that you're indeed booked in first class." He sounded uncomfortable, as though forced to repeat a request he found improper. Althea felt a sharp jolt of disbelief. "I've already shown my boarding pass at the gate. Why is there a question now?" Tony hesitated, obviously torn. "I'm sorry, ma'am. They said there was an error on the manifest, and they need to double-check. Could I see your pass again, please?" Jaw tight, Althea produced the pass from her phone's wallet app. Tony scanned it with a handheld device. Moments later, it beeped, indicating a valid match. Tony looked relieved, turning to Shannon and Jacob. "She's fine. Seat 2A is confirmed, no errors." But Shannon's eyes narrowed at Althea, and Jacob shook his head, as if unconvinced. The tension hung thick in the air. Althea took a breath, deciding to remain calm one more time. Yet her patience was nearing its limit, and the time was fast approaching for her to reveal who she truly was. With Tony's reassurance, the rest of the first-class passengers took their seats. Shannon and Jacob lingered in the aisle, an odd sight since gate agents usually left as soon as boarding closed. Althea noticed the flight crew exchanging perplexed looks. One attendant, an older woman named Linda, quietly asked Shannon if there was a situation. Shannon waved her off, muttering something about just making sure everything's in order. Althea felt every muscle in her body tense. She had done absolutely nothing to warrant this scrutiny, yet their suspicion seemed locked onto her. It was more than a simple mistake or bureaucratic mix-up. It was personal, tinged with the microaggressions. She recognized all too well. Across the cabin, a couple of other passengers whispered, shooting glances at Althea. She realized that, to an outsider, the scene might look like she'd committed some offense. She was torn between indignation and the instinct to keep her composure. In the back of her mind, she considered pulling out her Senate ID, but part of her bristled at the notion. Why should she have to prove her worthiness? Shouldn't respect and courtesy be granted to every passenger? The plane's door closed with a definitive thud, and the announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard American Airlines Flight 1081 to Washington National. Flight time is about 1 hour and 45 minutes, weather permitting." Shannon and Jacob finally turned to leave, but before they did, Shannon shot one last glance at Althea, shaking her head with a smirk. Jacob whispered something and chuckled, leaving Althea with a simmering anger in her gut. As the plane taxied away from the gate, Althea looked out the window at the sprawling airfield. Row after row of planes dotted the runways, each carrying people with distinct stories and backgrounds. She reflected on how the airline staff's job should be to ensure a smooth experience for all passengers, not to single them out and mock them. But prejudice had a way of creeping in where it didn't belong. Linda and Tony went through the safety demonstration. Althea forced herself to pay attention, if only to distract her mind from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She gripped her armrest, inhaling and exhaling slowly. She reminded herself that once she reached DC, she would refocus on the legislative battle at hand. Yet a part of her was determined if Shannon and Jacob tried anything else, she would not remain silent. Sometimes, the best way to fight injustice was to stare it down and, if necessary, show them exactly who they were dealing with. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign blinked off. Tony and Linda began the first-class service, offering drinks and small plates. Althea could usually relax at this point. She'd enjoy a light snack, maybe review a briefing packet. But her nerves were still on edge, replaying Shannon's sneer and Jacob's derisive laughter. Her phone, now allowed in flight in airplane mode, was open to her staff's messages. Vanessa, her chief of staff, had sent a heads-up about new data relevant to the committee hearing. Althea tried to immerse herself in the numbers, but a soft chime over the intercom distracted her. Tony, please report to the forward galley," a shaky voice said. It was Linda, sounding anxious. Tony excused himself from serving drinks and walked up the aisle. Sensing tension, Althea discreetly turned her head. Linda looked pale, her eyes darting. Standing next to her, unbelievably, were Shannon and Jacob again. How had they even gotten back on board? Had they remained on the plane? This was highly irregular. Gate agents typically didn't stay on board after doors closed, but perhaps they had jumped on as non-revenue passengers after all. Althea couldn't hear every word, but phrases reached her ears. "She's definitely not what she claims," Shannon said. "Some messed up credentials," Jacob added. Tony's face contorted in confusion. Linda tried to calm them, shaking her head as if she disagreed. Althea's pulse soared. Enough was enough. She unbuckled her seatbelt, ignoring the watchful eyes of other passengers. She made her way up the aisle, approaching the flight attendants and the two gate agents. Tony noticed her and looked relieved, while Shannon stiffened. "Is there a problem?" Althea asked, her tone firm but measured. She refused to be a passive bystander in her own humiliation. Shannon crossed her arms, glaring. "We have reason to believe your documentation is fraudulent." She flipped out her phone, showing Tony something on the screen. "There's no record of an Althea Johnson of your background paying for a first-class seat." She emphasized the words as though your background were a slur in itself. Jacob chimed in. "Why don't you come clean about how you got this seat?" Althea felt a surge of anger so strong it almost made her tremble. She had never experienced such blatant disrespect in an airline cabin. Tony tried to intervene. "We already scanned her boarding pass. Everything checks out." Shannon brushed him aside. "I'm sure you can check out anything if you have the right counterfeit or stolen information. Let me see your ID, Miss Johnson. Right now." Althea's heart hammered. She could keep quiet, show them only her driver's license again, or she could end this charade. The lines had been drawn. She held her ground, jaw set, and made a choice that would change the entire trajectory of that flight. Althea reached into her purse, fingers grazing past her driver's license, landing on the leather pouch that contained a small but powerful piece of identification, her United States Senate ID. She had always been careful about flaunting her position. She'd earned her place through decades of public service and a relentless drive for equality. But these two gate agents, Shannon and Jacob, had pushed every boundary of decency. She removed the ID card and held it up for Shannon, Jacob, Tony, and Linda to see. The official seal of the U.S. Senate gleamed under the cabin lights. "You want proof?" she asked calmly, though her voice quivered with contained fury. "I'm Senator Althea Johnson of Michigan. This is my identification." A stunned silence fell over the galley. Shannon's face blanched, her smirk vanishing. Jacob's eyes darted from the ID to Althea's face, disbelief evident in his slackened jaw. Tony seemed equally shocked, though more so with an undercurrent of respect. Linda gasped softly, realizing the gravity of the situation. Breaking the silence, Althea continued, "You've harassed me from the moment I checked in. You accused me of lying about my seat, implied I was fraudulent and singled me out based on your assumptions. Now that you know exactly who I am, would you care to explain yourselves?" Shannon tried to speak, but only managed a sputter. Jacob, eyes wide, managed a shaky apology. We didn't. We had no idea." Althea's anger surged. "No, you didn't. And that's the point. You had no idea, yet you treated me with open contempt. Your personal biases have no place in an airline that claims to uphold professionalism and respect. This is unacceptable behavior toward any passenger, senator or not." Tony stepped forward, carefully taking a look at the ID. The authenticity was undeniable. His face burned with embarrassment, but also with a fervent desire to rectify the situation. "Senator Johnson," he said gently, "I'm so sorry this happened on my flight. We value your patronage, and we want all passengers to feel safe and respected. I'll need to inform the captain about this incident immediately." Shannon stood rooted to the spot, her cheeks flushed. Jacob swallowed hard, looking at the floor. Linda hovered, uncertain how to de-escalate. Althea returned the ID to her purse. "Yes, please inform the captain. And when we land, I expect to speak with a senior manager from American Airlines about this," she said, her tone unwavering. The revelation had been delivered. The next steps would be on Shannon, Jacob, and the airline's leadership to decide. But Althea was through pretending everything was fine. After the explosive reveal, Tony hurried to the cockpit, presumably to inform the flight's captain of the brewing crisis. Linda hovered apologetically. Meanwhile, Shannon and Jacob seemed paralyzed, exchanging frantic whispers. Their earlier bravado had evaporated like morning fog under the heat of the truth. Althea stood in the galley, the anger she felt simmering just below her polished exterior. She could practically hear her parents' voices in her mind, reminding her to remain poised under pressure. Over the years, her political career had taught her that composure often carried more power than raw fury. Still, her hands trembled with the lingering adrenaline. She had never intended to pull rank, but the situation had demanded nothing less. Passengers in nearby seats noticed the commotion. Some recognized her name now that it was spoken aloud. A soft murmur rippled through the first rows of economy, where curious eyes peered over seat backs. Althea realized that the scene was quickly morphing into a mini public spectacle. Finally, Tony returned, motioning for Althea. "Senator Johnson, the captain would like a word with you in the forward galley." She nodded and followed him, passing by Shannon and Jacob, who stood aside. She caught a glimpse of shame on their faces, but felt no sympathy at that moment. In the narrow corridor, Captain Rose Hernandez stood waiting, an authoritative figure with a crisp uniform and a calm, collected demeanor. "Senator Johnson," she began quietly, "I was just briefed on the situation. Let me start by sincerely apologizing on behalf of American Airlines. This is unacceptable. We aim to treat every passenger with dignity, and you, in particular, should never have been subjected to this." Althea raised a hand gently. "Captain, I appreciate your immediate attention, but I want to make it clear. I expect accountability for Shannon and Jacob. They've harassed me repeatedly, not just once. Whether I'm a senator or not is irrelevant. No passenger should have to endure this sort of behavior." Captain Hernandez nodded, her expression earnest. "I agree. I will contact our operations team as soon as we land. We'll have a representative meet you at the gate. I assure you we take these complaints very seriously." A sudden jolt of turbulence shook the plane, momentarily punctuating the conversation. Althea steadied herself against the galley's counter. "Thank you," she managed, regaining balance. "I'll return to my seat now." As she walked back through the aisle, she felt a range of gazes upon her: pity, respect, curiosity, even confusion. The entire cabin buzzed with tension, and there was still an hour left before they reached Washington. But Althea had taken a stand. Now she had to see it through. When Althea returned to her seat, Tony discreetly pulled her aside. "Senator, do you mind if Shannon and Jacob offer you an apology?" he asked softly. "They insist on speaking with you." She weighed her options. Part of her wanted nothing more to do with them, but she also knew that public figures like herself often had to navigate delicate situations with grace. "All right," she said with a measured nod. "They can come here, but I'm not in the mood for excuses." Moments later, Shannon and Jacob appeared, looking like scolded children forced to apologize in the principal's office. Shannon opened her mouth first, but no words emerged. Jacob cleared his throat. "Senator Johnson, we're really sorry about the misunderstanding. We had some irregularities on the passenger manifest." Shannon jumped in, her eyes darting nervously. "We didn't mean any harm. We just thought someone might be using a fake identity to get a free upgrade. It happens sometimes. You know?" Althea's gaze was steady. "So you immediately assumed I was committing fraud because—" Shannon's face flushed. "We, didn't recognize you, and your seat assignment flagged in our system. That's all." Althea inhaled slowly. She had encountered these half-baked excuses many times in politics and in life. "Whether or not you recognized me shouldn't matter. Any passenger deserves the presumption of honesty, especially if they've presented valid credentials at check-in, the gate, and again on board. You crossed the line from diligence into harassment." Jacob grimaced. "I know, we messed up." "Yes," Althea agreed curtly. "You did." Shannon looked on the verge of tears, though Althea couldn't discern if it was genuine remorse or embarrassment at being caught. "We truly are sorry," she whispered. "We never thought, we didn't know you were." She trailed off, flailing for words. "A senator?" Althea finished the sentence for her, a sharp edge in her tone. "Does that make me more worthy of respect? Or is it just the shock that you offended someone with a high-profile position?" Shannon and Jacob stood mute, unable to respond. Althea finally said, "Well, if you are truly sorry, perhaps you'll take a hard look at your assumptions. I accept your apology on the condition that your behavior changes, not just toward me, but toward every passenger who might look different than you expect." They mumbled their gratitude and slunk away. Althea sat down, unbuckling the tension in her shoulders. The immediate confrontation was over, but the real reckoning would come after they landed. She had no intention of letting them get off scot-free for their blatant disrespect, senator or not. Accountability was paramount. The remainder of the flight was subdued yet electric, with undercurrents of gossip. Althea sensed that nearly everyone in first class knew of her identity now, and word likely trickled back to coach. Nonetheless, the flight crew maintained a professional facade, offering standard services. Tony and Linda looked apologetic each time they passed Althea's seat. Once the aircraft began its descent, Captain Hernandez's voice crackled over the PAR system, instructing everyone to return to their seats and fasten seatbelts. Althea peered out the window, glimpsing the familiar sprawl of the Washington, Point D.C. metropolitan area. Though she had flown in countless times, each approach carried a certain gravity. This city was the heart of legislative power, the stage upon which she fought for her constituents. The wheels touched down smoothly at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Althea felt a wave of relief. She was eager to exit the plane, meet with the senior representative from American Airlines, and address the fiasco properly. She had a full schedule of committee work ahead, but first she needed to ensure that the airline took her complaint seriously. The plane taxied to the gate. Althea's phone buzzed with incoming messages the moment the seatbelt sign flicked off. She saw a text from Vanessa. "Heard you had a situation on your flight. Are you okay? Media inquiries are swirling. Althea sighed, realizing how fast news traveled. Someone must have already tipped off a news outlet or posted on social media about the incident. As the passengers in economy began to deplane, Tony approached Althea. "Senator Johnson, we have a corporate manager waiting at the jet bridge to speak with you privately." She nodded, collected her briefcase, and stood up. Shannon and Jacob were nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in the galley or slipping out to avoid further confrontation. Linda gave Althea a small, supportive smile as she stepped off the plane, rolling her carry-on in tow. Exiting the aircraft, Althea immediately spotted a woman in a crisp navy suit with the American Airlines logo on her lapel. Her name tag read Rachel Smith, Customer Relations Manager. She wore a pinched expression of concern as she extended her hand. "Senator Johnson, I'm Rachel Smith. I'm here to address the incident that occurred on your flight." Althea shook her hand, setting aside her frustration for the moment. "I appreciate you meeting me here. We need to talk about what just happened and how American Airlines intends to handle it." With that, they stepped aside from the stream of disembarking passengers, heading for a quiet corner in the terminal. The next phase of accountability was about to unfold. In a small seating area near the gate, Althea took a seat across from Rachel Smith. The customer relations manager pulled out a tablet, ready to take notes. "Senator Johnson, first and foremost, on behalf of American Airlines, I extend a sincere apology for any disrespect you encountered. We strive to ensure every passenger feels welcome, and I'm disheartened to learn of your experience." Althea nodded, appreciating the direct acknowledgement. "Thank you, but an apology is just the first step. Shannon and Jacob repeatedly harassed me, questioned my legitimacy, and mocked my presence in first class before and during the flight. They only backed down once I presented my Senate ID." Rachel sighed, tapping a few notes on her tablet. "I'm already aware of the key points from the flight crew's initial report." The captain filed a brief statement as well. "May I ask, do you want to file a formal complaint, or are you considering legal action?" Althea's jaw tightened. "I want to file a formal complaint. I also want to make sure these employees face disciplinary measures and undergo training to prevent this from happening again. Whether I consider legal action will depend on how the airline responds." Rachel's face remained professional, though Althea could see flickers of tension. "I understand. We take these matters seriously. Shannon and Jacob will be placed on immediate suspension while we conduct a thorough investigation. If found responsible for violating our code of conduct, especially regarding discrimination, they could be terminated." Althea let that sink in. She wasn't out for blood, but she also believed that real change required real consequences. "I hope the investigation is swift and fair. I'm a public figure, yes, but no passenger should have to endure their behavior. I've endured racial bias my entire life. I'm not about to let it slide without accountability." Rachel nodded firmly. "Absolutely. I'll escalate this to our Vice President of Customer Experience. As part of our remediation, we'd also like to offer you a complimentary round-trip ticket on American Airlines or a refund for your current travel costs." Althea waved a dismissive hand. "I'm not looking for freebies. I just want the airline's culture to change, so that next time someone who doesn't fit the mold of a first-class passenger isn't treated like a criminal." Rachel paused, her gaze solemn. "That's our goal too, Senator Johnson. I'll keep you updated on the investigation. In the meantime, please accept our apology and rest assured we are addressing this matter at the highest levels of management." With that, Althea concluded their meeting. She had a schedule to keep in the Senate, but she knew this issue was far from resolved. The consequences for Shannon and Jacob were in motion, and the airline's reputation now hinged on how they handled the fallout. For Althea, the day's ordeal had already hit the news cycle, and the real storm was just beginning. By the time Althea arrived at Capitol Hill, her phone was buzzing incessantly. Vanessa intercepted her outside the Hart Senate office building, face etched with urgency. "Senator, we have media queries from CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post. Everyone wants a statement about the airline incident." Althea suppressed a groan. She had hoped to handle this quietly, but in the age of social media, privacy was a luxury. "Okay, let's be strategic," she said. "Set up a short press briefing after my committee hearing. I need to address the policies we're discussing in the hearing, but I'll give a statement about the airline situation too." Vanessa nodded. "Yes, Senator. The hearing on economic reforms starts in 20 minutes. They'll want your opening remarks." Steeling herself, Althea walked briskly through the corridors, aware of the dual responsibilities. She now juggled her legislative duties and the unexpected role of spotlighting racial discrimination in travel. She delivered her prepared remarks to the Senate committee with poise, advocating strongly for economic measures that would uplift small businesses, a topic dear to her heart. But the moment the hearing concluded, cameras and reporters swarmed. Microphones were thrust in her face, voices overlapping. "Senator Johnson, can you confirm you were harassed by American Airlines staff? Is it true you had to show your Senate ID? Will you file a lawsuit against the airline?" Althea raised a hand to quiet the barrage. She spoke in a clear, measured tone. "Yesterday, I experienced an incident of bias from 2 American Airlines employees. Their behavior singled me out and questioned my right to be in first class. While I'm disappointed, I'm not shocked. Racial bias is real, and it can show up anywhere. I've filed a formal complaint. I have faith that American Airlines leadership will investigate and take appropriate action. My main focus is ensuring that all passengers, regardless of status, skin color, or background, can travel without facing discrimination." The reporters pressed further, but Althea kept her answers concise. She refused to let the airline saga overshadow her legislative work, yet she also recognized the power of this moment. By highlighting her experience, she could draw attention to a broader issue plaguing countless individuals who lacked the platform she had. As she left the scrum of reporters, her phone buzzed again, an email from Rachel Smith, updating her that Shannon and Jacob had been suspended pending investigation. Hard karma, it seemed, was already hitting back. But Althea knew this was only one step in the fight for true accountability. 2 days later, Althea woke to headlines splashed across news outlets. American Airlines employees suspended after harassing black U.S. senator. Pundits debated whether the staff's actions were purely personal bias or a symptom of systemic problems. Althea tried not to let the attention derail her. She kept her focus on legislative duties while quietly monitoring the airline's response. Late that afternoon, she received a phone call from Rachel Smith. "Senator Johnson, I have important updates," Rachel said. "Our internal investigation found that Shannon and Jacob have a track record of unprofessional conduct, including prior complaints for rudeness. Their behavior toward you violated multiple corporate policies, including those related to bias and harassment." Althea's posture stiffened. "And the outcome?" Rachel sighed. "They've both been terminated. This was not a decision made lightly, but their actions were blatant and confirmed by witness statements from the flight crew. Additionally, we are rolling out a refresher training program on diversity and inclusion for all customer-facing staff. It's starting next week." Althea took a moment to absorb this. Though she never took pleasure in someone losing their job, she also understood the necessity of consequences. "I appreciate the swift action. I hope this sends a message that discrimination has no place at American Airlines or anywhere else. I trust the training will address not just this incident, but the larger issue of implicit bias." Rachel's voice carried a note of optimism. That's the plan, Senator. We're committed to creating a respectful environment for all. We also value your input, if you're willing to share it, on how best to shape our training moving forward. Althea offered a tight smile, even though Rachel couldn't see it over the phone. I'll consider it. Thank you for the update. Once she hung up, Althea mulled over the stark irony. Had Shannon and Jacob treated her with basic courtesy, none of this would have happened. But their mocking, prejudiced behavior had led to an explosive fallout, one that ultimately forced the airline to reckon with its internal culture. The final wave of karma landed when local news interviewed a tearful Shannon, who defended herself by saying she never intended to be racist, just that she assumed the senator couldn't afford first class. The public backlash was swift and unforgiving. On social media, people pointed out how such assumptions were exactly the problem. Through it all, Althea remained focused on her legislative path. She had no interest in vendettas, only in fairness and justice. Yet she couldn't deny a small sense of relief that the matter was settled with firm repercussions. Some stories take flight in ways we never expect. For Senator Althea Johnson, a routine trip from Chicago to Washington, D.C., became a stark reminder that prejudice can lurk in the most ordinary places. In the end, her quiet resolve and powerful credentials combined to deliver a swift reckoning for those who mocked her. But this story is bigger than a single confrontation. It's a wake-up call for businesses and individuals alike. We need to check our biases, stand up against discrimination, and ensure that every traveler, whether a high-ranking official or an everyday citizen, receives the respect they deserve. Thank you for watching this tale unfold. If Senator Johnson's fight against bias resonates with you, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. By spreading these stories, we become part of a broader movement toward empathy, justice, and real accountability values that can help us all soar higher together.